Our group. The Gunnel Grabbers are a group of wilderness canoers from northern Michigan who have been canoeing the rivers of Ontario every year for the past 13 years. 14 canoers made the trip this year to the Steele River Circle Route, a beautiful and challenging combination of both lake and river canoeing. A total of approximately 100 miles. The starting point about 375 miles northwest of Petoskey, 300 miles northwest of the Sioux. The group was made up of Al Damschoter, Jim Stackus, Bud Needhammer, John Tanton, Tom Ray, and Al Litzenberger, Bob Doctor, Mike Steele, Joe Bowers, Mike Doctor, two visiting Austrians, Kurt Nordberg and Peter Tumler, Don Moore, and Tom Needhammer. The first step is always crossing the Mackinac Bridge through the Sioux, Wawa, White River, Marathon, through some very scenic country on Highway 17, and finally off the main highway to our departure point on Santoy Lake.
Mystery and the unknown are truly the love and the lure of wilderness travel.
We arrive at our departure point, and gear is unpacked, and the canoes and equipment are ready for the 8-day, 100-mile journey.
Wilderness gives back to us some of the calm, serenity, and sense of belonging we have eliminated from our hurried lives.
Into the waters of Santoy Lake, a strong tailwind helping as we paddle towards our first portage about 4 miles distance. Don Moore gets a little boost from the wind. The lake is surrounded by hills, and the portage is up and over one of these hills to another lake approximately 800 feet higher in elevation. The portage is very difficult, and although only a mile in length, the trail is very steep and wanders through a canyon, then a boulder field, before it finally gets to Diablo Lake. The portage is a double carry, first carrying canoes, returning and carrying packs. So a 1-mile portage becomes a 3-mile walk over some very difficult terrain. Al Litzenberger takes a necessary break. And Don Moore makes a very valiant struggle up the last leg with the group at the top, giving encouragement. Our first campsite was a small, beautiful island on Diablo Lake. We relaxed and enjoyed the good feelings that result from having a difficult portage behind us. We carried in steaks for our first dinner, a very pleasant evening, topped off with a beautiful sunset. And for those who stayed up, an awesome display of northern lights. Truly a beautiful experience, a difficult day, with a very beautiful ending.
Beautiful sunsets always lift spirits and give an afterglow of serenity and contentment. Beauty always gives a sense of fulfillment and joy.
The next morning, we broke camp and started on our journey down Diablo Lake. We didn't go too far before we came to our second portage. It also was long and difficult, but much less difficult than the previous day. After negotiating the portage, we arrived at the third lake in the chain, Cairngorm Lake. We canoed this lake to our second campsite, a beautiful spot in a grove of pine trees. We had a very pleasant evening with a happy hour, a chicken a la king dinner, with Mike and Bob Doctor doing cleanup duties afterward. The next morning, we traveled down Cairngorm Lake. We fished as we canoed and pulled out 2 very nice lake trout and several northern. It was warm and we went shirtless to absorb some sun as we paddled north. We stopped at an island for a lunch break, built a fire and had some soup and sausage, cheese, trail mix, had a few laughs. As we got back on the lake, a good tailwind was blowing. Don and Mike, Bud and Tom have experimented with a sail. It was so successful, we rafted all 7 canoes together and proceeded to sail for about 16 miles. We had a happy hour on board and completely enjoyed the trip to our third campsite. next morning we checked our maps to pinpoint our location. And then once again on Steele Lake.
Traveling by primitive means and with man's nomadic ancestry, man is at home doing what men have done for uncounted centuries.
Tommy Ray looking like a true voyager. Again, we had a good tailwind, so we hoisted sails under Master Sailor Tommy Ray and sailed for approximately 10 miles to our next camp, a rock island. A very beautiful sight. The strong winds, which were such an advantage in propelling our canoes, caused some problems in keeping our tents anchored down. But we also had the advantage that black flies and mosquitoes were kept at a minimum. A very pleasant spot to camp. The constant tailwinds were a tremendous advantage that would have been very difficult if blowing from the opposite direction. The next day, more paddling on Steele Lake. Lake paddling came to an end, though, as the lake narrowed and we experienced our first whitewater of the trip. Short runs of whitewater alternating with lake paddling took us to our fifth campsite on Eagle Crest Lake. Beside the campsite was a stretch of about 200 yards of whitewater. We all ran the rapids several times for the experience. First portaging up, canoeing down, portaging back, canoeing down again. This was our first experience of taking pictures from the canoe, getting a bowman's view of whitewater. Here, John Tanton is very expertly handling the bow. This is followed by another sequence where the camera following in the second canoe, giving an idea of what the bowman sees as he approaches and travels through whitewater.
When running rapids, and as the current grows faster, there's no retreat. You know you must go through, come what may. You can never tell what will happen. It's fear laced with exhilaration.
Here's Jim Stackus and Tommy Ray showing some class canoeing. Mike Doctor and John Tanton following. And finally, Tom and Bud Needhammer. After leaving our beautiful campsite on Eagle Crest Lake, we turned south and went through a series of rivers, whitewater followed by a widening to almost lake size. This alternating between calm stretches and challenging whitewater lasted throughout the day. Here's Bob and Mike Doctor negotiating through one section of the rapids. Al Damschoter and his partner Peter Tumler, who 2 days previously had put a crease in their canoe when they wrapped it around a misplaced boulder. They were very fortunate in coming out of the mishap with no injuries. And finally, Tom and Bud Needhammer canoeing the same stretch of whitewater. Here, John Tanton and Kurt had a little problem with a midstream shelf. Finally, Joe and Liz taking the same stretch, with Joe breaking his paddle at a very crucial point. That evening, we arrived at our sixth campsite at Rainbow Falls, a beautiful spot with water cascading down about a 40-foot drop. We had had a misty, rainy day most of the day, and the campsite at the top of the falls was quite a welcome stop. Finally, our last day on the river, a long, winding stretch. The water was moving well, and the high banks gave a constantly changing panorama. It was at this point that we saw an eagle circling one of the high cliffs, which was quite a thrill for all of us. On this final stretch, there were 4 log jams that had to be portaged around. The takeout points were high banks and required a lot of cooperative muscle work to get the canoes and equipment in and out of the water. The actual portages were fairly wide and clear. Here Tom drags an empty canoe across one trail, followed by Al and Peter carrying theirs. Final run down to Santoy Lake, and there we camped on the sandy beach of the North Shore. We got out all the food that was left. Being our last meal, there was no reason to hold back. So with a meal of soup and cornbread and an additional assortment of cheeses and sausages and crackers, we ate quite well. An additional bonus was a cache of beer that we had put in a cold spring 7 days previously. Mike Doctor and Mike Steele canoed the 4 miles to retrieve it and were treated like conquering heroes on their return. The next morning we were quite surprised to wake up to a thick fog, keeping visibility to less than 50 yards. We decided to canoe the 8 miles lake on a compass heading set by Tommy Ray. We stayed very close as we started out. Getting lost would have been very easy. After paddling for about an hour, the sun started to break through, and for a period of about 30 minutes, we experienced one of the most beautiful scenes imaginable. The lake was smooth as glass, and the lifting fog gave us a very rare feeling of surrealistic beauty. As the fog lifted, we found ourselves right on course, thanks to Tommy Ray's navigational skills. Finally, our trip comes to an end at the spot we departed from 7 days previously. We loaded up our gear and gathered for our last group picture. All of us showing the wear and tear of 8 days in the wilderness.
How swiftly time passes out of doors where there's never a moment without something new. Dawns and sunrises, mist moving out of the bays, the shifting of clouds, the sound of bird calls, the movement of animals, and the magic of dusk. I've been happier, but I can't remember when. We sang the old songs over and over again, told the threadbare jokes, and laughed as though we were hearing them for the first time. This is the afterglow of the happy times we know together in the bush. Paddling along, watching the skies, clouds, and horizons, there's time to mull many thoughts and translate them in the timeless background of hills and distance.